This is Chapter 3, Part 2. We left off talking about Devlin and his how he comes down, his perspective, this legal moralism on these, especially these private morality issues. In the interest of time, I'll skip over these specifics here, so that a little bit of it is summarizing some points we've already made with a couple extra points, but go ahead and take a look at those on your own. I'd like to get to Hart, the other side of the debate. His position, HLA Hart, is one that we call a legal positivism point of view. It views the law as solely a human creation, and that should say does not attempt to discover higher laws. So this is, again, he's a pragmatist, but this is a specific legal perspective that we call legal positivism. And so unlike Devlin, who said that law should be sort of rooted in a moral, even religious foundation, Hart would say, well, no, we don't need to focus on morality, that we just need to look at sort of take that pragmatic point of view. Let's look at the problems in society, and let's see how law can be used to reduce those really harmful problems, but kind of not just base law on morality. That's kind of too simple of an approach, he would say. So he was an advocate of this legal positivism, and he identified 5 criteria for law. Law are the commands of human beings, number 1. Number 2, there is no necessary condition, or I should say connection, between morality and law. 3, the analysis of legal concepts separate from morality is worthwhile. Number 4, law is a closed system where decisions can be deduced from predetermined rules. Moral judgments cannot be established by proof. So he's trying to create some distance between the law and religious traditions or moral traditions or moral foundations. Again, it's more practical. The emphasis is more practical than it is right and wrong, a focus on right and wrong. The law should be clear about what it means and when and to whom it applies. So he would argue for very clearly written laws, and I think people would agree with that. Hart disagreed with Devlin that feelings were enough to decide laws. Feelings change according to Hart. They evolve. Society's feelings on things will evolve. Even moral considerations can change and evolve. And so he argued that basing the law on morality is too simple of an approach. The first question, and you can see here that Hart is drawing on Mill that we talked about last time, where the key question is, what is the harm done? Whether the behavior causes real harm. If it causes real harm, then maybe we need to criminalize it. If it's not so harmful, then maybe we should let it go and accept it, tolerate it within society. The morality of the majority can be dangerous to the minority. That's so Hart would say it's not a good idea to base law on just public opinion. Devlin was talking about that jury of 12, and if you have 12 people agree that something is unacceptable, then you can make a law. It makes sense to make a law against that, a criminal law against that. But Hart is making the argument that, well, sometimes the majority is wrong or can be unjust, and especially towards a small minority that may feel differently, and you need to respect sort of minority rights, and that just because it's the majority of people, or even a wide majority of people, that doesn't necessarily make good laws all the time, Hart would say. So Hart and the 6 concepts of law, again, I don't want to get too much in the nitty-gritty here. So he would say that the foundation of law is private morality, freedom to pursue your own lifestyle. So he takes this Mill point of view of maximum freedom to do your own thing, and as long as you're not harming others, then people should be able to do their own thing. The rationale of law is to protect rights so people can live freely but safely. So again, it's more of a practical concern, safety, as opposed to a moral concern like Devlin had, that we need to have a good, healthy, moral society. The formation of law should involve careful study of the facts and issues. For the application of law should rely on judgment, not uniformity. So this one thing I didn't talk about with Devlin, a difference between the two, is you see here that Hart is saying that, hey, we need to, the law needs to be flexible. We need to give our judges or our police officers, authorities, judgment, discretion, because reality is complex and different situations call for different judgments, different decisions, and we don't want to have uniformity because that does an injustice to specific differences. People, behaviors happen in different contexts, they're different, so we need to handle them differently, and so we need to have professionals that can use judgment to decide the best thing to be done in that particular situation. I didn't mention it before, but Devlin goes the other way and says, hey, right is right, wrong is wrong, and so we need to apply the law uniformly to everybody and sort of minimize how much discretion and personal judgment of the officials should be involved. The focal point should be on the process of law, according to Hart, need to have a fair process where the steps involved in law and the steps throughout the criminal justice system should be fair and just, and the focus should be there, not on the results. Devlin would be more likely to say that, hey, if you've got a low crime society, you have a healthy society. If you've got people treating each other well, cooperating well, and a low level of conflict, violence, criminality, hey, then that's really important. So Devlin would focus more on the results, sort of the moral health of society as opposed to the process, and is each step done with justice and propriety. Discretion, so I've already mentioned discretion, giving authorities a lot of discretion to judge situation by situation should be encouraged, according to Hart. Now, so those are the two major perspectives: a more traditional one, legal moralism; a more modern one, legal positivism, and they line up with the idealist and pragmatist points of view. Now, for the rest of the chapter, we get into some other specific legal philosophies. And again, I'm going to try to avoid details because it takes up too much time, but at least familiarize yourself with these major perspectives and introduce the ideas a little bit. So this natural law is a really important traditional view of the law that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. So it's over 2,000 years old. And so it's a very ancient origin, and it's a very traditional approach. And it lines up more with the idealist point of view. So there are universal principles of right and wrong in nature. There is design, order, and intent in the universe. So according to the natural law perspective, you don't really necessarily have to focus on God. You can, but you could just focus on nature, because according to this view, there exists in nature a design, order, that if you study nature carefully, you can find within it sort of morality, what makes which principles, what's good and bad, and what true and good principles are. That is rooted in nature. And so this way you don't get into religious questions and issues of God and that sort of thing. But it's the same sort of idea that right and wrong go beyond human beings, and even if you didn't have human beings, nature would still contain within it right and wrong. And so what law needs to do is get in conformity with nature's law, with the laws that are found in nature. This is really very, very influential on the America's founders, on the founding fathers, on the Constitution, that they drew very heavily on this natural law perspective. Again, it goes all the way back through the ancient Romans to the ancient Greeks, that laws, you need to design laws that are consistent with the laws of nature. And that the idea is that there's this order and design that goes beyond human beings. Legal naturalism, that's the specific perspective that comes from this way of seeing things, right and wrong, rooted in nature. Human law should conform to natural law. So you should, as you're forming new laws or evaluating laws, deciding whether to get to old laws, you need to see if those laws are consistent with natural law or not. So an example of this would be something like go back to the civil rights era in the United States, and you had the Jim Crow laws in the South, where black citizens did not have the same rights as white citizens. They had separate areas for eating and different areas on the bus you had to sit. So you had these different laws that created segregation and inequality among these two groups of people. And so a natural law perspective might say, well, these are bad laws because they're not consistent with justice. They're not consistent with nature's laws, which would speak to justice, equality, fairness, equal treatment. And so they're bad laws. And so they're really sort of illegitimate and need to be reformed. And that a person would actually be in their right to defy those laws and disobey those laws because they're bad laws. See, so if this natural law perspective gives you sort of grounds, a framework by which you can criticize current laws and judge them based on this larger perspective, right? So that's one thing that people who take a natural law perspective, they'll argue that is a virtue, that's an advantage of their position, is that they're in a better, stronger position to be able to criticize the laws that we have. And we'll talk more about this here in a few minutes. An example of a natural right: all persons have the right to live without fear of violence. So this natural law scholar, someone who takes this legal naturalism perspective, would say that it's not just humans who came up with this good idea that all people have the right to live without fear of violence. The natural law person would say this is true independent of what humans think, that it's embedded in nature that people have these rights, and that the human laws that we create should be consistent with this natural law, that you have a right to live without fear of violence. According to this perspective, laws should apply to all, should be general and apply to law. There should be little discretion. So again, natural law lines up with an idealist and Patrick Devlin, more that side of things, the idealist side. Again, that this idea that there are eternal principles that go beyond humans that we need to try to follow. Also, this type of point of view tends to see that there's a natural tendency for cooperation and a recognition of good in human beings. So as humans, we naturally want to get along with each other. That's our tendency, and that we have an intuitive part, a sense within us of what is good and what's bad. The idea here is that we're kind of clued in, attuned to nature's laws. We kind of sense them. And so that we kind of intuitively, you just kind of know that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, according to this natural law perspective. Now, an advocate of this natural law perspective, Mortimer Adler, said that law is really arbitrary if it's not rooted in natural law. So he would say if you take the perspective that laws are just made up by humans and they're kind of convenient for us to use, but they're not really connected to any transcendent principles, no transcendent right and wrong that goes beyond humans, it's just human creations, well, then it's sort of hard to criticize them, because if people made them up and they liked them and put them together, well, then that's good for them. And then they can vary from society to a society. This group of people may come up with one set of laws, and that group of people over there in a different society will come up with different laws. And, they're different, but they work for those people over there, they work for us over here. So that Adler would say that there's a certain arbitrariness here where the laws aren't really good, they're just sort of convenient, whatever people come up with. And so there's sort of an arbitrary quality, he would say, to this kind of when you don't use a natural law approach. Now, we want to make sure that we introduce the critical theories of law. Everything we talked about so far is kind of traditional in one way or another. Even the legal positivist has been around for a long time. But in more recent decades, you've got theories of law that are more critical, that are more kind of really skeptical and take a pretty cynical light on law and how it works. According to these kind of perspectives, law is created by the powerful to help them keep power. So all these other more traditional theoretical perspectives tend to see the laws being neutral and laws as reflecting what the public wants and being a reflection of the moral foundation if you take that legal moralism point of view. But the critical folks say no, laws are not made to reflect what the public wants. Instead, rather laws are made to reflect what the powerful, the elites, the people who run society, what they want, and that the laws are made to the advantage of the elites and to the disadvantage of people lacking in power, to ordinary, people, powerless people. So it takes a much more critical point of view, saying law tends to be inherently designed to be unequal. That's what the critical folks say. Four important critical, and also the conflict is used. The conflict perspective is also used here as well. Don't stress about those. We're still talking about these critical kinds of ideas about the law. Throughout American history, laws have been made to protect the interests of the powerful. Okay, so that's that critical kind of idea. In early America, the powerful people tended to be the landowners, the people that owned the most land and had the most wealth. Number two, those with power have different interests than those without power, according to a conflict or critical perspective. That interest will, what I need, what I want is going to be different depending on what my situation and standing is in society. That's what this perspective says. Laws should be examined skeptically for elements of bias against those with little power. So this perspective will say when you go analyze laws and look at them to see whether they're good or not, look for bias. Look for how the laws could have been skewed and written in a way that advantage the powerful and disadvantage ordinary people without power. And a critical theory of law can improve the conditions of those without power. So it's sort of it's a more activist in a way. It's a more activist type of perspective where you're looking for bad law. You're looking for a law that's unjust and unfair to less powerful people. And you're going to want to change those laws so that you get greater equality and are empowering people with less power and taking power away from people who have privileged amounts of power, who have, disproportionate levels of power. This approach can somewhat be in the idealist tradition, since it views equality and justice for all persons as ultimate truth. So again, whether something is idealist or more pragmatist depends on, well, where do these values, principles come from? Are they human creations, or do they go beyond that, where they have some transcendent truth that goes beyond human beings? These could depending could fall in the idealist tradition, even though there's certainly more modern sorts of ways of looking at things and not a traditional way. According to this conflict or critical perspective, there's a tendency to be against a lot of discretion because there's a distrust of power. And of course, judges, police officers, prosecuting attorneys have a lot of power over individuals, over suspects. And so the critical folks are kind of, have mistrust of power. And so they tend to want to have laws that tie the hands of police officers, that put a lot of restrictions on police officers, judges, etc., so as to prevent the abuse of power and to try to reduce abuse against people without power, right? Because they think that discretion, if you give discretion to these to these officials, that they're going to tend to make decisions that are beneficial to the powerful and that hurt the powerless. Okay, now, so that's, if you ever have any questions about any of these sorts of things, let me know. We'll go over this stuff. But again, I'm going to try to, for testing purposes, keep it simple and basic because there's a lot of stuff here. Legal paternalism. What we mean by legal paternalism is government creates law to protect people from themselves. So paternalism, that the root of that is father. Pater is like what Latin for father. So to help yourself remember this, just think that legal paternalism is thinking of the government as the state is sort of like your father and you're a child. And we know that children are sometimes need a little guidance from parents who are older and mature and have more experience and wisdom, because children don't always know a lot, don't always make wise decisions. And so it's the same view with government here, that sometimes individuals will do foolish things, even grown-ups, adults will do foolish things, and so they need laws to sort of keep them from doing foolish things where they're going to hurt themselves. An example of this would be here's a random example. If a law that is passed to require that people wear helmets while they're riding motorcycles, because the idea is that some people will ride motorcycles without a helmet, and they may enjoy doing that, but it's dangerous. It increases the risk of serious head injuries if you get in an accident, death and injury, and that ends up harming not only the individual but society if you have someone who gets hurt, seriously hurt, or killed in a motorcycle accident because they're not wearing their helmet. So because people don't always make wise decisions, we're going to pass laws and force you to wear a helmet, because we can't trust you to wear a helmet to make the right decision on your own, because sometimes adults do foolish things. So it's this kind of perspective that law is necessary to prevent foolishness, irresponsible, reckless behavior, even by adults. So again, think of that as it'll help you remember if you remember that pater is a Latin word for father. Okay, weak paternalism says that the law should intervene to ensure that people understand and accept the risk of behavior. So that's a softer form than what you would see with strong paternalism, which is the law should intervene to discourage or prohibit risky behavior. So it's just a matter of degree. So you could have a law where you say, okay, we just want to let you know before you're able to do what you want to do, that you get a little lecture by the government which says, we just want you to know that this is a risky thing you're wanting to do, and we want you to sign this paper so that you understand the risks, and that if something bad happens to you, it's not our responsibility, right? So that's a weaker form of paternalism. A stronger form of paternalism would be, hey, listen, we know you want to do this thing, but we believe that it's reckless and irresponsible and dangerous, so we're just going to prohibit it. We're not going to let you We're not going to let you ride around with a motorcycle without a helmet on. We're going to make you do it for your own good. And so that's a stronger version of paternalism. So there's different levels of these things, how extreme we want to get with laws in this way. Legal paternalism fits best in an idealistic category. So again, the people who take this perspective, they tend to think, hey, they're thinking more moralistically, more, a little bit more in that more traditional way. We need to use law to make a good society. It's not just about individual rights and maximum freedom. It's we're trying to have a good, healthy society here. And if we have to have some laws to push you to do the smart thing, well, we'll do that, right? So that's where legal paternalism would be more likely to fit in. It holds that a society has a moral obligation to protect its citizens, with the law acting as a parent. Remember, think father or parent. The law acting as a parent of its people, of the citizens, the subjects. An idea termed parens patriae. This actually, the reason why we use this term subject here is that where this idea comes from goes all the way back to when we had monarchies, when we had kings running societies, say English society, where we get a lot of our legal traditions from. The idea was that the king was like our father, and that he needed to pass laws to keep us safe. He's like the father of the country, and so he takes the place of our parents. Parens patriae means taking the place of the parents. And so it's like the king's the father, and so if he passes laws for our own good, well, that's a good thing. And so that's kind of a legal, paternalistic way of thinking. So it has ties to, history and the way monarchs used to make laws and dictate what should be done under their jurisdiction within their country. Okay, it tends to support a clear but rigid application of the law. So most of these perspectives think that laws should be clear, but some of them are more flexible and some of them might be a little bit more rigid, apply to everybody sort of thing. Okay, getting along in this video, let's take a break and we'll talk about legal realism next.